I want to start with a number. Inside your body, right now, there are roughly 60,000 miles of blood vessels, enough to wrap around the Earth twice, and every single one of them is lined with one delicate layer of cells, a lining thinner than a sheet of tissue paper. That lining has a job. It manufactures a gas called nitric oxide, and nitric oxide sends one simple message to your arteries: relax, open, let the blood through. Here's what nobody tells you at your annual physical. Somewhere after 50, that production line starts shutting down. By 60, many people are producing a fraction of the nitric oxide they made in their 30s. The vessels are still there, the heart is still pumping, but the signal to open is fading, and this is where the well-meaning advice fails you. You've been told your whole life, drink more water, and you should, please, keep drinking it. But water is the delivery truck. Water is not the instruction. You can drink 8 glasses a day and never once tell your arteries to open because plain water carries no message. So the question isn't how much you're drinking after 60, it's what you're putting in the glass. Because there's a group of foods, ordinary, unremarkable, probably sitting in your refrigerator tonight, that your body converts directly into that missing signal. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly which ones and exactly how to use them. In 1980, a researcher named Robert Furchtgott was running an experiment that kept failing. He was studying how blood vessels relax. He'd take a strip of artery, apply a chemical that should have opened it, and sometimes the vessel would widen beautifully, and sometimes it would do nothing at all. Same chemical, same tissue, opposite results. It made no sense. Then he figured out what was different. In the batches that worked, his technicians had handled the tissue gently. In the batches that failed, they'd scraped the inside of the vessel, accidentally stripping away that thin inner lining. The muscle was fine, the vessel was intact. But without that lining, the artery had lost the ability to open. That accident won a Nobel Prize because it revealed something nobody expected. Your arteries don't decide when to open, the lining tells them. And the way it tells them is by releasing a gas, nitric oxide, that seeps into the muscle wall and gives it permission to let go. Think about what that means for a moment. Every time you climb a flight of stairs, every time your legs demand more oxygen, every time your hands get cold and your body decides to send warmth back to your fingertips, none of that happens because your heart pumps harder. Your heart is a pump. It pushes. It has no idea where the blood needs to go. The routing, the opening, the intelligence of circulation, all of that lives in a layer of cells 1,000th of a millimeter thick. And that layer ages, not dramatically, not overnight. It happens the way most aging happens, quietly, over decades, in a way that never announces itself. The enzyme that manufactures nitric oxide begins to slow. The raw material it needs becomes harder to access, and at the same time, something else is happening. The ordinary wear of living, the oxidative stress, the inflammation, the accumulated damage produces molecules that hunt down nitric oxide and destroy it within seconds of its release. So you're facing a problem from both directions. You're making less. And what you make is being taken away faster. By the time most people reach 60, the amount of nitric oxide their vessels can produce has fallen substantially from what it was at 30. In some studies, the drop in the vessel's ability to widen on demand is cut roughly in half the responsiveness, half the intelligence. In the same body with the same heart, with the same 60,000 miles of vessels still sitting there, perfectly intact. Now here's what I want you to understand, because this is the part that gets missed. You don't feel a nitric oxide deficiency. There's no symptom called that. Nobody wakes up and says, my endothelium is underperforming. What you feel instead are things you've already been told to expect. You feel it in your hands, cold fingers, cold toes, especially in the morning, especially in winter, and someone tells you circulation just gets worse with age, as though that's an explanation rather than a description. But cold extremities are what happens when the smallest vessels, the ones farthest from your heart, stop receiving the signal to open. They're the first to go because they're the most dependent on that signal and the least able to compensate without it. You feel it in your legs. You walk to the end of the block and there's a heaviness that wasn't there 5 years ago. Not pain, necessarily, just tiredness that arrives earlier than it used to. Your muscles are asking for more blood, and the request is going out. But the vessels aren't opening wide enough or fast enough to answer it. You feel it in the way you recover. The stairs that leave you standing at the top for a moment longer. The gardening that costs you the next afternoon. And you see it on a machine, in a doctor's office, in a number that keeps drifting upward. Because when arteries can't relax, they stay slightly constricted. And slightly constricted arteries mean the heart has to push against more resistance. Systolic pressure climbs. And every year it climbs a little more, and every year someone tells you this is normal for your age. It is common for your age. That's a very different thing. Because here is what makes this worth an entire talk. Unlike so much of what changes in the body after 60, this particular system is not gone. The vessels haven't disappeared, the lining hasn't been destroyed, the machinery that produces nitric oxide is still sitting there, still assembled, still functional. It's simply been starved of what it needs to run for years by a diet and a set of habits that nobody ever told you were connected to circulation at all. There's a study I think about often. Researchers followed thousands of adults for decades, tracking something almost nobody measures at a checkup: how well hydrated people were, judged by the sodium concentration in their blood. The people who ran chronically on the dry side, even mildly, even within the range a doctor would glance at and call normal, developed chronic disease earlier and aged, biologically, faster than the people who stayed well hydrated. So let me say this as plainly as I can before I complicate it. Water matters enormously after 60, and it matters more than it did at 40 for a reason that catches people off guard. Your thirst mechanism degrades with age. This is well documented and genuinely strange. Take an older adult and a younger adult, dehydrate them both to the same degree, and the younger one will report powerful thirst while the older one reports comparatively little. The kidneys also become less efficient at concentrating urine, so more water leaves the body for the same waste removed. Your body is losing more and asking for less. The alarm bell gets quieter exactly when the fire gets bigger. So no, I am not here to tell you to drink less water. Please don't take that away from this. If anything, you should be drinking on a schedule rather than waiting to feel like it, because the feeling is no longer a reliable instrument. But here's where the advice runs out, and where almost every conversation about hydration and circulation stops far too early. When you drink a glass of water, you're doing something specific. You're restoring plasma volume, the liquid portion of blood, which is around 90% water. That's genuinely useful. Low plasma volume means thicker, more viscous blood, harder to push, more strain on the heart, restore the water and blood flows more easily through the same pipes. Real benefit. No argument, but notice what that is. That's a change to what's inside the vessel. The nitric oxide problem is a change to the vessel itself, to the lining, to the wall, to the muscle that decides how wide the opening will be. And nothing about a glass of water speaks to that wall. Water carries no instruction. It doesn't contain a substrate the enzyme can use. It doesn't switch anything on. It fills the pipe. It does not widen it. This is the distinction I want to lodge in your mind. Volume and diameter are two separate problems, and hydration only solves one of them. Think about a highway. If traffic is crawling, there are two possible reasons. Maybe there aren't enough cars moving through, a supply problem. Or maybe there are plenty of cars and only 2 lanes open when there should be 4, a capacity problem. Water addresses supply. It puts more cars on the road. But if the lanes are narrowed, adding cars doesn't help. It can even make things worse. And after 60, the far more common problem is lanes. You can see this in the everyday experience of people who are doing everything right. They carry the bottle. They hit the 8 glasses. They're up twice a night because of it. And their hands are still cold in the morning. Their legs still get heavy at the end of the block. Their blood pressure still creeps upward year after year. They've solved the volume problem thoroughly, and they're standing in front of an unsolved diameter problem, wondering why the effort isn't paying out. There's a second thing worth knowing, and it's the reason I framed this whole talk around what's in the glass rather than what's not. Plain water isn't neutral in this system. It's a missed opportunity, repeated several times a day. Because the pathway that produces nitric oxide is, to a remarkable degree, a dietary pathway. Your body can build nitric oxide from an amino acid you eat, and that route becomes less efficient with age, precisely when you need it most. But there's a second route, a backup system, and it runs almost entirely on compounds you swallow, nitrates from plants, polyphenols from certain fruits, things that arrive through the mouth in liquid several times a day. Which means the glass in your hand is one of the few genuinely repeatable interventions you have. Not once a week, not a supplement you'll forget by Thursday. 6, 7, 8 times a day, you are already performing the ritual, lifting a glass, swallowing, setting it down. The habit is built. The frequency is perfect. The delivery system is already in place and running. And for most people after 60, that glass is doing exactly one job when it could easily be doing two. In the 1990s, a puzzle sat in the middle of nitric oxide research, and nobody could resolve it. The known pathway required oxygen. The enzyme in your vessel lining takes an amino acid called L-arginine, combines it with oxygen, and produces nitric oxide. Elegant system, well understood. But it created an obvious contradiction. The moments when tissue most desperately needs blood are the moments when oxygen is scarce. A muscle starved of oxygen needs vessels to open immediately, and yet the enzyme that opens them can't work without the very thing that's missing. The system fails precisely when it's needed, so there had to be a backup. And when researchers went looking, they found it in the most unexpected place, not in the vessel wall at all, but on the surface of the tongue. Here is how the backup runs. You eat a plant, a leafy green, a beet, a stalk of celery. That plant pulled nitrogen out of the soil and stored it as nitrate, an inert, stable compound your body cannot do much with directly. It's absorbed into your bloodstream within minutes and circulates harmlessly. Then something remarkable happens. Your salivary glands actively pull that nitrate out of your blood and concentrate it, up to 20 times the concentration found in plasma, and pump it into your mouth. Roughly a quarter of all the nitrate you swallow gets rerouted this way, back up into your saliva. For years, this looked like a design error. Why would the body work hard to move a useless compound into the mouth? Because that's where the bacteria are. On the back of your tongue, in the crevices of the papillae, live colonies of bacteria that possess an enzyme your own cells lack entirely. They can strip an oxygen atom off nitrate and turn it into nitrite. They do this for their own metabolic reasons. They're using nitrate the way you use oxygen, as something to breathe. And you have quietly built your entire backup circulation system on top of their waste product. This is a genuine partnership, not a metaphor. Your body cannot perform this conversion. It outsources the step to organisms that are not you, and it does so deliberately, spending energy to concentrate the raw material and deliver it to their doorstep several times a day. You swallow the nitrite. It hits your stomach, where the acid environment converts a portion of it directly into nitric oxide. No oxygen required, no enzyme required. The rest is absorbed and carried in the blood as a reservoir. And here is the elegant part. That reservoir converts to nitric oxide preferentially in tissue that is low on oxygen and slightly acidic. Exactly the conditions in a working muscle. Exactly the conditions in a region that's underperfused. The backup system doesn't just work when the main system fails. It works best in the conditions that make the main system fail. Now put that against what we said about aging. The primary pathway, the enzyme in the vessel lining, is the one that declines. That's the one running at half capacity by 60. But this second pathway doesn't depend on that enzyme at all. It bypasses it entirely. It runs on what you swallow and who lives on your tongue, which means it's accessible, not through a prescription, Through the grocery store. The plants that carry the most nitrate aren't exotic. Arugula sits at the top. Gram for gram, it's the richest common source there is. Then spinach, then beetroot, which is the one that made it into most of the clinical research. Then lettuce, celery, radish, kale, chard, fennel, watercress. The pattern is fast-growing leafy things and root vegetables. Beetroot juice became the standard in studies for a practical reason. It delivers a large, measurable dose in a small volume, and you can blind it in a trial by stripping the nitrate out of an identical-looking placebo. And when researchers ran those trials, the numbers were not subtle. Give someone a concentrated dose of beetroot juice and systolic blood pressure drops measurably within 2 to 3 hours, tracking almost perfectly with the rise of nitrite in their blood. Vessels widen more readily. Athletes use less oxygen to perform the same work. The muscles get more efficient because the blood is arriving where it's needed. In older adults, the effects on vessel function have been particularly striking, which makes sense. The people with the most to gain from a backup system are the ones whose primary system has slowed. But every one of those effects depends on one link in the chain that most people are actively destroying several times a day, believing they're doing something healthy, and it has nothing to do with what they're eating. Let me start with the thing you're destroying. In 2019, a group of researchers published a study that should have made more noise than it did. They took healthy adults and had them use antibacterial mouthwash twice a day for a week. Nothing unusual. The same rinse sitting in millions of bathroom cabinets. Within days, the nitrite in their saliva had collapsed. Nitrite in their blood fell, and their systolic blood pressure rose by 2 to 3 points on average, in some participants more. Nothing about their diet changed. Nothing about their exercise changed. They had simply killed the bacteria on the back of the tongue that perform the conversion step, and the entire backup pathway went offline. This is the habit that cancels the whole effect. You can eat arugula at every meal and follow it with a rinse that sterilizes the very organisms you're feeding. The chain has 4 links: nitrate in, saliva concentrates it, bacteria convert it, stomach acid completes it. Break any link, and the rest is wasted effort. So the first instruction is a subtraction. Stop the antibacterial mouthwash or move to a rinse without chlorhexidine or cetylpyridinium chloride. Brush, floss, care for your teeth thoroughly. None of that harms the bacteria in question. They live on the tongue surface, not in plaque. And if you use a tongue scraper, understand what it's doing and be gentle about it. There's a second link people break without realizing. Proton pump inhibitors. The long-term acid reducers many people take for reflux suppress the stomach acidity that converts nitrite to nitric oxide. I'm not telling you to stop a medication your doctor prescribed. I'm telling you to have the conversation, because if you're on one indefinitely and nobody has revisited it in 5 years, that's a discussion worth having for several reasons beyond this one. Now, the addition. The dose that shows up consistently in the research is roughly 300 to 400 milligrams of dietary nitrate per day. In real food, that's about 1 large handful of arugula, or 2 cups of raw spinach, or 1 medium beetroot, or a single 70 milliliter shot of concentrated beetroot juice. That is the entire ask. 1 handful. The timing matters more than people expect. Nitrite in the blood peaks around 2 to 3 hours after you eat, and the effect on vessels tracks that curve. So the question is, when do you most want your circulation open? For most people after 60, the answer is morning. That's when blood pressure surges, when hands are coldest, when the vessels are least responsive after a night of stillness, which means the nitrate wants to go in early, with breakfast or shortly after. The second answer is before you move. If you walk, garden, swim, take the stairs, do anything that asks your legs for blood, put it in 2 hours ahead. That's the window where the athletes get their advantage, and there's no reason the advantage belongs only to athletes. Here's how I'd build it into a day that already exists. Morning with breakfast, a large handful of arugula or spinach. Not as a salad you have to plan, dropped into eggs, folded into whatever you're already eating. Blend it into a smoothie if that's your habit. If greens in the morning is a bridge too far, this is where the beet juice shot earns its place. 70 milliliters, 10 seconds, done. Then, and this is the part I want you to actually do, hold it in your mouth for a moment before you swallow. Give the bacteria contact time. It sounds absurdly small. It's the difference between handing the raw material to the workforce and rushing it past them. Second dose, midday or early afternoon. The salad, the leafy side dish, the vegetables you were probably going to eat anyway, now chosen deliberately. Arugula, spinach, lettuce, celery, radish, chard, watercress. Rotate them so you don't get bored and quit in 3 weeks, because the intervention that works is the one you're still doing in March. Add a polyphenol source alongside it, because these compounds protect nitric oxide from being destroyed after it's made. Berries, pomegranate, dark chocolate at 70% or above, green tea, extra virgin olive oil. And keep drinking water. Volume and diameter, both problems, both solved. The water fills the pipe, the nitrate opens it. Then one habit that costs nothing and multiplies everything. Move your legs. 10 minutes of walking, twice a day. The physical force of blood moving faster across the vessel lining is itself the strongest known trigger for that lining to produce nitric oxide on its own. Food supplies the backup pathway. Movement restores the primary one. Running both is how you get the whole system back. So let me leave you with the thing I hope you actually carry out of this room. 60,000 miles of blood vessels. Still there, still intact, still yours. What changed after 60 wasn't the plumbing, it was the signal. And a signal is a very different kind of problem than damage. Damage you manage, a signal you restore. You now know where the signal comes from. You know it has a backup pathway that doesn't care how old your enzymes are. You know that pathway runs on leaves and roots you can buy for a few dollars. You know it depends on bacteria you've probably been killing every night without being told. And you know it works best in exactly the tissue that needs it most. None of that requires permission from anyone. Tomorrow morning, 1 handful of arugula. Hold the first sip a moment longer than feels natural. Skip the antibacterial rinse. Walk 10 minutes before lunch. That's it. That's the whole protocol. It is almost insultingly small next to the size of what it touches. And I'll tell you what I've seen in the people who do it. It isn't dramatic. Nobody wakes up transformed. It's that the stairs stop announcing themselves. The hands are warm in February. The walk that used to end at the corner ends at the park instead. You don't get younger. You get answered. Your body asks for blood, and this time it arrives. Go put something in the glass.